the varying shades of green that are used in that section of the plan. Can you just explain real quickly what those varying shades of green are?
Yes, the dark green that is identified in this area, 2 spots of dark green color are wetland, delineated wetland areas. The lighter green is existing vegetation. There's a darker green along the Newtown Creek, which is designated as existing riparian area, but we're showing it as a solid line where there's an existing sanitary sewer easement to distinguish between those areas.
And if you could continue on your comments.
Yes, as far as, so that's the contiguous area, which is 20% of the minimum, 20% required, would mean that we would be required to have 59,000 square feet to meet that requirement, and we are providing 95,970 square feet in that area. Number 2, C2, refers to no more than 30% of the minimum required open space shall be developed as impervious surface. The area that we're identifying as being impervious surface is the courtyard area between the multifamily residential units. That 30% maximum of the minimum would be 17,720 square feet would be the maximum impervious we would be allowed as part of our open space. The courtyard area itself is 13,720 square feet, so we're below that 30% threshold.
If I just quickly clarify for you, the ordinance allows a certain percentage of the open space to be impervious?
Correct.
Is that correct?
C3 requires that at least 20% of the minimum required open space shall meet the definition requirements for green space. Now these areas, we're identifying green space as a mixture of areas that we have here. We have the opportunities here to gain access to the natural areas. We have pocket parks that are proposed along State Street that have landscaped areas within them. The pedestrian connection to the sidewalk basically connects all these open spaces together.
Does the plan also indicate compliance with minimum lot areas requirements of the ordinance?
Yes.
And looking at impervious coverage, what's the maximum permitted? 60%?
Maximum permitted is 60%, yes.
Okay. And what's being provided?
We are showing 59%.
Mr. Green, building cover.
I'm sorry, just if I can ask a question. And this was also an issue raised by the Planning Commission. In calculating the impervious, a question came up as to the underground garage. You're going to address that?
Yes.
Okay.
The underground parking structure that's provided underneath the multifamily residential units is, the whole area is included as impervious surface in our calculations.
And that's because the parking garage is...
Right. Although there may be a green aspect above the parking garage, the water can't fully infiltrate down into the recharge. So we're considering it impervious.
Thank you.
And how about the requirements for building coverage?
Building coverage is 50%. And that also, I just want to note there that that includes the parking structure in part of the building coverage. It's not quite clear whether that would actually be required as part of that, but that does fit into the 50% requirement.
And if you can comment on the building height requirement?
It's 35 feet.
And what's the building height limitation for the parking structure?
33 feet.
Okay, and is that compliant?
Yes.
If you can comment upon the front yard setback at the site, what the requirements are and what's provided.
The setback at the along South State Street is 20 feet front yard for a multifamily residential, or for mixed use.
And I'll draw your attention to section 401, section 401D4, sorry, 401D3 of the zoning ordinance. And if you could just comment on how the front yard requirements for new construction along existing street frontage are being constructed.
Right, it's basically to be consistent with the surrounding properties. And if we take a look at the surrounding properties, based on the aerial photograph that was provided, that shows that we're being consistent with the setbacks that the existing structures show. Okay.
And if you could just show on the plan where the existing structure that you're talking about and how this follows the same setback.
So there's an existing structure to remain is located right along Penn Street here, at the corner of Penn and South State Street. The setback from the right-of-way as it exists is 9.75 feet, 9.72 feet. We are basically holding that as our setback for the proposed buildings as a minimum. The minimum setback is 10 feet that we're showing for the structure to the north side of the entrance drive is the closest we've come to the right-of-way is 10 feet. But again, that's consistent with other properties that are further north and south on State Street.
Okay. So the net effect of the proposed setbacks is consistency with the entire frontage of South State Street in this location, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I am correct that that is required under the ordinance, under both the design standards for general buildings and design standards for non-residential buildings, correct?
Yes.
And I also assume you're compliant with the side yard and rear yard setbacks, as planning commission, I believe, also commented.
Correct.
I'd like you to, well, I'm sorry, there's a requirement about the minimum distance between buildings for multifamily, and are we compliant with that?
Yes, we're showing 20 feet as a minimum.
I'd like you to give us a little bit of information on the uses themselves, a bit more detail about that. Why don't we start with the 6 multifamily residential buildings toward the back of the property. Can you tell us how many units are proposed? Actually, how many residential units are proposed there, and how many residential in the mixed-use area?
There are 51 two-bedroom units proposed in the multifamily residential area, 21 one-bedroom units proposed in the multifamily residential, and there are additional 49 units proposed in the multi-use zone.
And what are the size of these units, of the residential units?
The multifamily residential units are in the area of 1,750 square feet of living space. 1,750 square feet of living space. And the mixed-use units will be in the range of 850 square feet.
And for the mixed-use structures, what are the size of those buildings?
The
square footage of the retail uses.
The total square footage is
So 28,904.
I'm sorry. Yes, 28,900 square feet.
The TND1 ordinance, section 401D3D, provides that the TND1 shall incorporate mixed-use development and mixed-use buildings. And is this plan designed to comply with that requirement?
Yes.
It also provides that non-residential uses at the street level, combined with dwelling units on upper levels, are encouraged so that a diversified and coordinated arrangement of mixed uses can be provided. Is this project designed to comply with that requirement as well?
Yes.
And with regard to the requirement that residential and non-residential uses each comprise at least 20% of the gross tract acreage, do we meet that requirement as well?
Yes.
The ordinance also requires that the total street level floor area of non-residential development shall not exceed 50% of the gross building area of the project site. Are we complying with that requirement?
Yes.
I'd like you to take us through a little bit in some detail with the parking facilities, if you would. And perhaps we can start with the above-ground facility. Again, just point out the location and just let us know what the area of that facility is.
This is the area of the above-ground parking structure. It's approximately 36,000 square feet in size and footprint. The access to its 2 decks. One deck would be accessed on the south side. That would be the access to the ground floor of the parking structure. Another access would be provided separately for the upper deck of the structure. which is located to the northern side of the site.
And I'm sorry, the number of parking stalls?
There's a total of 210 parking spaces in the structure.
And the heights comply with the ordinance 714?
Yes.
And in the design phase, will there be room provided for the parking of bicycles?
Yes.
Is that something that the project site in general will provide?
Yes. Yeah, there's plenty of opportunities throughout the pocket parks and open space areas to provide bicycle parking as well.
And then if you can comment on the underground facility, location, access, and the area of that facility.
Yes, the underground parking facility is located directly beneath what's shown as the multifamily residential units. The limits of that parking structure are shown by a dashed line on your plan.
It's the heavier dashed black line?
Correct. And the access to that structure would be back through this access way. It would be ramped down beneath the multifamily residential units.
And what's the number of parking spaces provided?
185 spaces.
And is there any additional parking at the project site?
There is also proposed 6 on-street parking spaces.
And where again are they
And
located?
that's located on the two-way drive access off of South State Street.
And is there an indication as to whether the plan, the number of parking spaces provided complies with the ordinance requirements?
Yes.
And what are those numbers?
Total required parking for this site is 400 spaces, and we're providing 401 spaces.
What's the requirement? You have a note on the plan regarding parking, the retail uses, the requirement of retail use, and the amount of parking you've actually provided. And I believe the Planning Commission raised that question as well, that the ordinance requires 1 parking space per 400 square foot of retail, but it appears that your calculations are based on 300.
It's one for
If you can
300
just comment
is
on it.
required. One space per 300 is required for the retail. We're providing 1 space per 400 square feet to represent, well, that one space per 300 square feet is based on actual customer used area. So we're taking 25% out of that, which would be the 1 per 400 square feet as a representative number to quantify that parking requirement.
That's because the ordinance actually requires it's 1 parking space per 300 square feet of commercial floor area devoted to customer and client use?
Correct.
Okay, and your calculations are based on 25% of the floor area not being devoted to customer or
Correct.
client use, correct?
Right.
Okay. Is the current plan to provide for shared parking amongst the various parking spaces provided?
No, there's no shared parking proposed.
Okay. So the number that's required, that number is provided without having to share existing spaces.
Correct.
And another comment that was brought up by the Planning Commission was, whether any kind of restrictions can be put in place to, reserve certain areas in the above-ground parking structure for the people that live in the multifamily structures. Is that something that can be provided?
Yes. Yeah, the actual number of required spaces for the multifamily residential units is not completely provided in that underground area. It would need to bleed out into the above-ground structure.